Is it? Do we need? Why, I believe.
Yes, we do need
I
to.
like to. Can you hear me? I am generally criticized for having stentorian terms that people can hear me halfway across the county. So, if you're happy with me talking at you, we will proceed. I'm David Maxwell. I'm the chair of the Board of Commissioners for Electrical Commission, which was founded in 1920, and we are still governed by the Act, an act of legislature in 1920, one of which terms says that the meeting shall be presided over by a chairman. Duly appointed at said meeting, he must be an elected. Well, I can't chair this meeting unless you say it's okay for me to chair the meeting. If somebody else wants to take over, then more power to it. Are you okay with the chairing the meeting?
You should ask after somebody on the board like to chair.
Okay. Is there somebody else who would like to chair this meeting? Stating that, are you happy with me chairing the meeting? Yes. Okay. I'm not going to take vote on that. I'm not very good at adhering to conditions like this. I'm not an efficient type person, so you'll have to put up with a rather casual way of dealing with this. All right. What we are going to talk about to see is what we have achieved in the past year, which is sort of conventional for annual meetings. We talk about what we've done, and then get into what we are going to do in the future. So we're going to talk first about where we've been and what we need to do. So, in the past year, as beautifully laid out Phil, who is our headlines, which call us up, he has laid out what we have done, and that is in your package. And here we are, I can find it, here we are. You've changed a rack of transformers, and that is not a minor process. We have a number of transformers in our system that contain PCBs. We are mandated by the feds to get rid of those transformers by 31st of December this year. So we have to get rid of them. And following that, we have to have a way of paying for the new transformers that don't have PCBs. So that cascades down to later in the agenda as well. So we've changed 20 of the transformers. How many do we have left to change?
I think it's 32.
32.
Yeah.
We've got 32 left. And we have to pay for that. And we have to do it by the end of December. We have installed new transformers, not just replacements to the old PCB containers, but new ones, because we are asked to provide better service in various areas in the capture. We are responsible for the street lighting, and that is part of the RELP Act. That was one of the things that RELP was going to provide when they set up the utility. And then we do the usual electrical things, tree trimming, which is not a trivial thing. As you're well aware, we have trees bouncing on power lines to cause power outage. And that is a relatively expensive process to keep the vegetation controlled and we had to pay for it, which again, we getting back into the whole question of our finance, and that's coming up. We had a problem getting enough power down by Rose Bay area. And it was solved by installing a gadget at the end of the line that jacks up the voltage if the voltage is falling too low. We are mandated again by the federal government to maintain our voltages within very narrow limits. And you can either put in a larger wire or you put this thing at the end that increases the voltage if the whole paving because the line's too long. So again, that was an expense that we had to endure this past year. No debate here that we had this. Nope.
We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Someone put my
Okay, we gotta talk about it. We had 6 power outages this year, and I would point out to you that that is a lot less power outages in our area than in the areas outside Riverport Electrics.
David, I think people are still having trouble hearing. Could you use the mic?
Except it's technically different.
The issue with the mic, I guess, is that it needs to be located at the back of the room, and all the presentation equipment is located at the front of the room. So you might get work for people to get up with questions, but we weren't really sure how to provide the mic to David while speaking.
I could go to the back of the room and talk, but that helps.
All right, give us a moment of technical difficulties and we're gonna try.
Leave that. The other thing that we have achieved in the past year is to reestablish communications. We lost all means of communication 3 years ago. We lost our website, we lost our Facebook, and we lost any other means of communication, which I tried to fill the void by creating monthly newsletters. I'm not sure that it served the purpose totally, but it was better than nothing. Now we have a website, we have a Facebook page, and we have various other mechanisms that we will get into. And finally, we have to deal with our finances. We lost in the past 2 years our ability to do accounting. So we don't have accounting for the past 2 years. The last accounting was done, the last validated accounting was done back in 22-23. And since that time, we have not had audited statements, and we've not really had proper accounting. So we are reduced to doing our Google ourselves, and the core actually had, fortunately, a gentleman who is an accountant himself, and he has taken it upon himself to create the best accounting that he is able, but he's not doing this as an accountant, he's doing this in order to get some idea what our financial situation is. And Merrill is going to tell us what our financial situation is. Is that fair? That's the introduction. Yes, that is an introduction. Merrill is going to, yes. report to us, that's.
All right, I think we're gonna have some microphone here for Carol. Thank you, David, for doing that, part on mic, and hopefully people can hear a little bit better.
I'll come back after this. Not so clearly. Okay.
Question?
Could you elaborate on when you say we lost the ability to calculate our financial results? What happened?
Okay, so, David's right, and what he said, that the last one of the financial statements that we have are, as of our fiscal year ended March 31st, 2023. However, in the meantime, there has been proper accounting meeting taking place. One of the things that has happened over the past year is that the responsibility for our accounting processes were transferred to the town of home base, so all of the monthly billings and regarding receivable payment debts and so on, all being done by town of home bay. They have had a tough job piecing everything together, and it's taken some time, and because of that, it's been difficult for them to produce financial statements internally for us. So, as David says, I've gone in and done as much as, or if I can, to put some financial statements together for the year extended March 31st, 24 and March 31st, 2025. However, those statements and the numbers I'm going to show you for those 2 years are not final numbers. They don't have all the year-end adjusting entries that's required to produce the proper set of financial statements. And of course, they have not yet been audited. This stands right now. We have engaged Galvino to perform the audit for those 2 years, and they also did the audit for 2022-23. And they're scheduled to begin in September. So we're a little bit ways yet from having audit statements for those 2 years. So anyway, as I said, we do have audit statements for the year end March 31st, 2023. We have some copies here available for people if they want them, or they're available on our website for anybody to review. And as I said, I've gone in and done what I could at this point, put together some numbers, done some presentations to give people an idea of where we've been over the last couple of years and how we got to this position that we're in now. And with the assistance of the town of home bay, actually mostly the work of the town of home bay, there's also a capital and operating budget that's been prepared for this current fiscal year. So anyway, now we're getting some fun stuff with the numbers. So instead of doing like a detailed review of a set of financial statements, since the last audit statements we have are over 2 years old now, what I thought I'd do is go through some key numbers that I thought would be beneficial for people that explains the financial situation of the utility today. So the first thing I wanted to take a look at is basically the progress of our gross profit, the gross profit being the difference between our revenues, what we sell electricity for, and what we pay for electricity. So you can see from the graphic you have in your package and up on the board, on the board, our revenues have gone from almost 1.6 million in 21-22 year, and took up to 2.16, well, in 2024-25, 2.1 million, and we're projecting 2.167 million in this current fiscal year. In the meantime, costs have cost of the electricity has increased also, and you'll see that in the years of 22-23 and 23-24, the difference between what we sold our electricity for and what we had to pay for it decreased. So our gross profit starting out in 21-22 was 36.3%. it dropped 28% and then 19%. These are the result of increases in the cost of the electricity that we purchase and then we sell. And then after that, you'll see that our gross profit bounces back and goes up to 31.1%, and that's basically because of the rate increases that we had passed on to customers. In June of 23, there was phase one of the general rate increase, 20%. February 24, there was another increase, 12.5%, as part of our general rate application. In February 25, there was a rate increase of 3.8%, which was a result of the general rate application, the deferred revenue rider. And then another rate increase of 4.4% in March of this year, which is part of the flow-through clause in our agreement with UARB, allows us to flow increase in the cost of the electricity that we purchase on to our customers directly. So part of the reason why we've had financial difficulties over the years is because of the fact that when we do have increases in cost of electricity or increase in our operating expenses, we have to go through a regulatory process in order to increase rates to cover these expenses. There was always a time lag in between when these expenses are incurred and when we get the approval to increase rates. So in the meantime, you end up with a period where you're actually, losing money because of these increased costs that not less passed on to the customers. So the whole purpose of that graph is just to show that there was a period where our gross profit dropped dramatically, and that put a large strain on our financial situation. Any questions? You're not allowed to ask questions.
If I could just ask a follow-up, maybe.
Yeah.
I know there's decisions to be made involving debt and budgeting and so on. And this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation. If it's going to be December of 25, which is 21 months, almost 2 years from what's the time period when the fiscal year would be finished. So the March 24 financial statements, there won't be an audit report until December 25. I guess I just worry about how do you make decisions when there's such a gap between the audit being done and the accounts? How do you know you can rely on the underlying information? Just
That's been the challenge that we've been facing over the past year. Right? The fact that financial reporting is behind, and we don't have a lot of statements, and that's been a challenge, and it's not the fault. I don't think of anybody that's here today. As I said, home dates over the academy responsibilities, and they had a struggle to piece everything together, and there was a very difficult audit in the 22-23 year, as I understand, and we actually had difficulties obtaining a firm to proceed with the audit because of that. Well, we don't really to get on the engagement, but yeah, but you're exactly right. It's difficult thing to do until you don't have the proper information.
Oh, yeah, so thank you. No, I still don't quite understand though. Isn't it mandatory that you provide annual audit your financial statements? I don't understand how you function as a body without providing that. Isn't there some accountability to the government as well? Do they not mandate this that you would have to provide this? That's
my knowledge. The only requirement is what's later in the Riverport Electric Act, but maybe.
Yes, the act calls for
Yeah.
an AGM annually, which do financial reports and an update. And another question I have for you, when the decision was made to close the Riverport office, why was it only moved from the ratepayers, because in the act, it calls for that decision to be made by the ratepayers or have input on it. It's sort of financial, not on my list of things to ask you, but I want to know the rationale. And I want to know if there was a financial accounting, the pros and cons, that the ratepayers should have been made party to take a look at to see whether that decision was a good decision. Because I think you lost control over Riverport Electric when you closed Riverport Electric's office. That's my personal view.
Can I speak to that very briefly?
Yes, okay.
You have to recognize, and I was going to get to this anyway, so I'll tell you now. You have to recognize that this is an entirely new board. We have no past history, we have no past responsibility, really. And we have had some difficulty getting a clear idea of how things work. In practical terms, what happened was that the board collapsed for a number of reasons, primarily medical issues. People got sick, people dropped out because they simply couldn't do it. So we ended up with a completely new board with no past history. And
Everybody that could give you the history was taken out of the office. I understand all your problems. We had this discussion before, and you did have.
it goes on. Because we didn't have a functioning administration, if you want. We were contracted, or we contracted ourselves to area. And I was going to talk about.
I understand, but my basic question to you was,
So
why under the act clearly states that if you dispose of assets, well, you can read the act and you can understand that you are supposed to consult the electorate to make those kinds of decisions. So why wasn't there a meeting to do that?
Because at that point, at the beginning of our tenure, the tenure of this board, we had contracted, or we were contracted to area to provide us with administrative support and advice. And area decided that this was in the best interest of the organization.
Of Riverport Electric, yes, but that's not Riverport Electric maintenance.
We really were involved in. That decision was made, and we went along with it because we were very new. We knew nothing. We were green.
But I spoke to you, not this past January, but I believe prior to January, on just this issue of that there should be more consultation with Riverport Electric ratepayers, so they were abreast. Because you're also not aware that at 2021, there was a motion put on the floor that there was to be detailed notes kept. And I know you can't post them on the portal, because there's no portal, because we were held up for ransom by a previous employee, okay? Which I disagree with how that was handled as well, because that person should have been fired and charged.
Yep.
That's simple. Anyway, these are issues. I don't want to hijack the meeting.
There's no benefit in it.
No, I don't want to hijack the meeting, but decisions of that nature and magnitude need to be vetted. At a special meeting, if you can't have an AGM, there are provisions in the act for providing people with the basics to make the decision, not the board, the electorate.
And that's why we're having the meeting tonight.
Oh, I understand that, but we're three AGMs behind here, okay?
I can't take responsibility for.
No, I know you can't. I know you can't.
Facts.
I know you can't.
David, I could just add a little bit of detail with respect to legislative compliance. the requirement is for a resolution of the ratepayers membership here, if the office is being divested. The office is closed, the board are here to talk about the long-term future of the office. And that is the discussion that they are here to initiate, so
Okay,
we are following.
let's not get hung up, let's go forward.
We're gonna proceed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you didn't know I made you. I'm happy to give you money for your son's thing.
On the guys, it's on the guys.
I'm David Maxwell, I'm the chair.
I'm Bernie Roycroft, I'm the commissioner.
And he knows a lot about electrical systems. And readout, I'm aware of how much I don't know. And Merrill. What's the matter? Merrill Zink, is,
Treasurer,
he's treasurer,
on the.
okay, he's the treasurer. And this is Dylan Hyde, who is the CAO of Town of Mahone Bay. Sorry, and we contracted after an area blew up. Area failed, area got digitally well, so area dropped us and signed over the contract to Town of Mahone Bay. So Town of Mahone Bay then took over as the administrative backup. So Dylan is the administrator of Town of Mahone Bay, but he is also providing Ralph with administrative backup, because he knows what he's saying. Who else do we got? We got Ashley, who is a financial officer of Town of Mahone Bay, who is providing with accounting services.
I am the person that you see at the bottom of your letter, so that's me.
We've also got Kim, who is essentially the billing clerk and bookkeeper. And she is the one who you will contact if you have difficulty with your bills.
He's not here.
And she's not here.
This is Claire.
And this is Claire, who is what you call it?
Administrative support.
Administrative support. And she's doing a hell of a good job. And
So I guess just thank you very much for the introduction, David, and apologies for speaking without having been introduced. We're very pleased to be here in this support role. We are here to support the AGM as well, so in that way, we've seen Claire going around with her shirt and her hand there and everything. And we may be called upon occasionally to address the question to get it there. But otherwise, we're sitting over here, it's their show, and we're here to help.
yeah,
So just I do the book there, the status of the audit and we'll look at the history behind the audit of the statements, I'll pass over to actually. You want to?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm Ashley, I'm the manager of finance.
I just want to know who's on the board. I know you already support something. How many?
who's on the board?
It's right there.
Three. We are the board. We're in
Who's three?
three. Just the three of,
Thank you.
and there's room for two more.
All right,
Well, with the three of us with one exception if you want. We had five on the board when we took over in September. I don't know, last June. There were five of us in June.
that's fine.
One of them resigned within a month. So we were then left with four. We replaced that one with another one who lasted for 3 or 4 months and then he resigned. And at that point, we took it upon the board themselves to find somebody to carry on until they could be voted on and approved by the membership at a meeting. We did not call a meeting specifically to replace this missing member, but Arlie Robar agreed to take the place of previous ones. So Arlie Robar is the fourth member. We still have a fifth vacancy. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's fine.
Functionally, it is us. But what's happened to Arlie? Arlie unfortunately has got, this seems to be a very hazardous occupation. They keep dropping out. Arlie has had a major heart attack and he is currently in the hospital in Edmonton, being treated, with special treatments. But he's not. We haven't written him off because he has agreed to stay on, providing the membership agrees to have it. So he's one of the two vacant positions that we want. Okay,
Later on in the agenda, we will certainly be talking about filling those positions tonight. And it's on the agenda.
yes,
The one thing I just wanted to clarify, and Meryl's doing a great job of expressing what's going on, is that when we say that the audited financial statements are not complete, that is true. But the accounting is done and up to date. So I want to make sure that that's not misconstrued. And that we can see what's going on. So I know somebody asked how you make decisions right now. Well, we have the financial data, we have the information, it just hasn't been audited. Now, I will say, as a treasurer, Meryl is incredibly active. He has full access to our system, read only, but full access, and he has spent a lot of time in there. So we do sort of have an internal checks and balance. My team does the work, I check it, and then Meryl checks it. And, he's the CA, I'm the CA, we have the background to know what we're looking for. So I just want to provide a little bit of assurance that, although the financial statements are not audited, the information is there and as sound as we can have it at this point. So when you ask how are we making decisions, we are making decisions based on financial information that I provide. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit.
Okay. Yes. Give me some insight into how you. I'm interested in how you go with office, picture. Acts as a goal, or. Is it a byproduct of simply you said over the fence, you have what guides you in. Creating enough profit to run your organization and are the standards that you are trying to meet. Okay, actually, when we might better get into sort of the whole application process, myself. Sure. Yeah. I think it's for the way I'm getting.
So, sorry, would you mind just restating your question? I'm happy to address it.
Yep.
And you can use the mic in the back too. Why? It should be working.
I think that if you can provide us with some insight, how you set your gross profit goals.
Okay, great, thank you. So essentially, as was said by Meryl earlier, everything that the commission does is regulated by, it was now called the Nova Scotia Energy Board. Most people would have traditionally known that there's Nova Scotia Affiliate Review Board. The province has recently changed the name of that entity. The Nova Scotia Energy Board has to approve any rates that are set here by the commission. So essentially, when the price of power being purchased changes, the commission has to continue to supply that energy to customers. Really has no choice but to continue to purchase it. You can look for other providers of energy, but at the end of the day, if there is no other alternate source, then the cost of generating, bringing the power to your door has increased. And in order to then, as Meryl said, catch up to the regulatory lag to get the rate that you all would pay to increase by the same proportion that the rate that the commission must pay its suppliers, they have to go to the Nova Scotia Energy Board. And there are two ways that the commission can do that. Either through a flow-through mechanism. So if you're purchasing from Nova Scotia Power and your energy increases, you can then go to the board through a relatively expedited process and say, well, look, what we buy went up by 3%, our customers are going to need to pay 3% more. And the board will say, relatively speaking, within a quarter or so, this is gonna now be effective in terms of the rate, so. The rate increase you had this year, the 4%, that increase, that was through that process. But you'll remember a couple of years ago, obviously the much larger increase that happened, that was the result of a general rate application process, which is an enormously expensive, time-consuming process, which all of the municipal utilities are currently lobbying the province to find some way in their efforts to cut red tape to address. RELC in particular spent about $170,000 on the general rate application process. So that's $170,000 to the right to charge you what the commission actually pays to purchase the venue. So it's an incredibly cumbersome process, but ultimately that process was necessary because the commission was actually purchasing from an outside source, not Nova Scotia Power. A hard-won regulatory decision some 15 years ago allowed for small utilities in this province to buy energy on the open market. And for many years, New Brunswick Power provided Riverport Electric Light Commission with energy at a significantly cheaper rate than Nova Scotia Power. New Brunswick Power found themselves in a position where they were no longer willing to offer that energy to our utilities. Mahone Bay was in the same position, and Kanish, Berwick were all in that same position. And because that energy is being purchased from an outside source, it was necessary to go through the general rate application process to have those rates take effect. It was also the first time in something like 15 years that RELC had increased its rates for the actual cost of doing business. For folks like Phil and what they get paid for that vegetation maintenance we heard about, all of that was 6% of that rate increase. That's the only rate increase having to do with anything but the cost of power for about 15 years. So, generally speaking, it's the cost of power that changes that gross profit scenario, and it's the regulatory lag necessary to bring the rates up that brings that back into balance. And I think that's what Meryl was speaking to. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
So I guess just like that, I think as far as determining what the proper level of gross profit would be, us as board members, we're just at the point now starting to get our heads around this whole operation and to understand finances and so on. And I think that's part of what we've looked at in the budget process for the current year, and something that they're going to be looking at in the coming months. And who knows, maybe that will lead into another DRA application or something like that. But as to what the exact level of gross profit should be for running this utility, that's probably not a question that I can answer. I think it's just a big percentage at this point. So anyway, on from there. Well, the next slide shows our net income and loss over the years. So I've taken in the green bar as probably from the previous screen. Put the expenses in red and then any profit or loss in the yellow. So you can see that in 2021-22 we had a small profit, $81,000. However, then in 2022-23, our expenses ballooned and our gross profit dropped off, and as a result, we ended up losing $426,000. So as for the next explanation of why the year-over-year change was that part of the reason was the loss of gross profit. So we had a decrease in gross profit of $176,000 that year. One major expense of an increase was professional fees, which went up by $126,000, and that was largely due to the DRA application that year. We had an increase in maintenance and repair costs of $109,000, but not exactly sure what that is, but probably the vegetation control and so on. And then another area that was a major increase in that year was administrative salaries that went up by $52,000. Going into the 23-24 year, and again, this is 1 year cycle together, so it's not final, but our gross profit came in at $356,000. Expenses came down from the previous year to $630,000, and that translates to a loss of $274,000. Again, looking at carried back to the previous year, part of the reason for that change was professional fees again went up by $30,000. And repairs, though, there were very few expenditures for that in that time period, so that went down by 101,000, so as part of the reason all the expenses went down. And administrative salaries went down by 95,000 in that year. So then for 24-25, we had a gross profit of 666,000. Expenses continued to drop to 586,000, and we're looking at probably a small profit or at least a break even for the 24-25 year of around $80,000. As I said, we put together a budget for the current fiscal year, so we're looking at a gross profit of 776,000. Expenses are going up because of a couple items, and that means that we are looking at a loss or small loss or break even. But part of the reason for expenses going up is that maintenance repairs are increasing by 114,000 in the current year. That's likely due to vegetation control, and professional fees are going up. Well, that is partly because of the fees that we pay for services to the town of Home Bay, but we have to realize that that's also offset by the fact that we don't have any internal salaries anymore. So all of our services are outsourced at this point. So talking about the growth problems and then income loss, that's all fine, but everybody knows you need cash in order to operate business, no matter if it's profitable or not, you still need cash. So on this graph, I plotted our cash surplus or deficit year over year. So in green, you'll see the cash surplus deficit. Well, in 21-22, we had a surplus of $76,000. 22-23, we had a small cash surplus of $50,000. 23-24, looking at a deficit of around 57,000. 24-25 years coming in at a deficit of 206,000, and we're actually budgeting a deficit for the current fiscal year of 273,000 from a cash flow base. As far as what our current cash balance, started out with 234,000, and the black line is the progression of our cash balance. We started with 234,000. We ended up the 24-25 year with a small cash balance of 21,000, and we're looking at a negative cash balance of about 273,000. So you might question why and how we continue to operate over that time period with the amount of cash efficiency that we had in those years. Well, largely because of the fact that we relied on our supplier base really to provide us with cash. So if you look at our accounts payable over that same time period, we started with an accounts payable balance of $198,000, and at the end of the 24-25 fiscal year, that accounts payable balance had increased to $965,000. So, in effect, by postponing payments to suppliers, we've been able to maintain enough cash, or provide enough cash to continue to operate and pay for our other expenses. So yes, essentially the utility of using its suppliers to finance capital expenditures, which over the past 4 years have actually come in at around $750,000. So I don't think it's by coincidence. I think it's by I don't say design, but it's no coincidence that the amount of capital expenditures that we had over the last few years coincide with the increase in accounts payable. So the other big subject that needs to look at from a financial standpoint is capital expenditures. So our capital expenditure budget for this current fiscal year is actually pretty small, and it's probably $185,000, although I suspect that there'll be other things besides the one list here that will, increase that by a certain amount, but the negative things that we anticipated for the current fiscal year are the replacement of the PCB transformers, which has been discussed already, so that comes in at around 135,000 this year. There's been a new line which is being installed to Hell Point and the whole currently into that. And I guess just the lines need to be moved over at this point. And also the deposit hut, which I don't know if anybody's gone past the area over and lost on the north side and seeing the structure's been erected there, but that is finally operating posts for storing the vehicle. Looking forward though. As far as the capital investments is concerned, there are 4 major projects that we're looking at for the next 4 years. And I will again pass this back to Will to give you a better explanation of what these latest projects might be.
Question before we get into
Yeah.
what they was about. I guess my question is, as someone who's not very used to reading financial statements, what is the debt that we're like, what are you telling us? How much debt are we and how is it, how will we pay for it? Because I know that, over 22, 23, I'm still getting that income or loss. We're at several $100,000, we'll have the loss of the income. And then I see that there was recovery, on the road to recovery, will still have negative in the next one. But I guess it like concerns that I just don't quite understand how much debt RELC is carried to right now.
Okay, so the major part of our debt is actually just trade accounts payable. So amounts that we owe suppliers, 2 of our major suppliers because they provide services being Town and Home Day and area that we buy out just before, and of course Nova Scotia Power. So as I showed in the previous graph, the balance of account payable is yeah, so the balance of accounts payable at the end of the 24-25 year was $965,000.
So can you just break that down for me? Because there's only 3 big. How much do you owe the town of Home Day? Well,
Okay,
say that the other 50.
400,000 dollars.
So we owe the Home Day 400.
Yeah,
And who's that?
area around 200, 250, something like that.
250, and can you just, that's an acronym, can you just
So areas.
explain what that is? Quick,
It's the Alternative Resource Energy Authority, it's the operator of the Ellis House Wind Farm over the valley.
okay, so there's a wind farm, we owe $250,000.
Yeah, for power that was delivered to Riverport but not paid.
Okay, and then the last one is who? Who's this?
Well, as far as major suppliers, the Nova Scotia Power obviously is a major.
And that's powers to.
No, Nova Scotia Power is.
Okay, how much should we owe this power as a previous debt? Not new. This is previous, not. Okay, so. You said
There's 600 suppliers that we're.
there's 300 somewhere, I don't understand.
Pardon?
You said we have 900K in that. So far, we have the Home Day for 400K. We have wind farm for 250. So we have about 300-ish. What's the 300-ish?
Yeah.
So, at the time that the dad's collected, sorry. Thank you. So at the time that Merrill collected this data, NSPI hadn't had security breach, so we actually hadn't been billed for a couple months, as I'm sure you're all aware, that NSPI kind of halted operations a little bit. So there was a payable to NSPI, but in the normal course of business, we pay NSPI first before we pay area and Quebec.
And NSPI.
Nova Scotia Power.
Okay.
Yeah. So we do keep Nova Scotia Power up to date.
So we do or don't know that, remember.
At the time that Meryl would put this together, there may have been a payable on there, but we've recently received a bill, so we would pay that bill. And
So
it
in
would
terms of
be,
the documents we're looking at now, we have accounts payable of 650K.
yeah,
and
for the
we're all-
long-term loan that we'll be discussing later,
So
that's
that's
what
a
we'll be focusing
third.
on.
What we're talking about doesn't exist.
Is that third of it is essentially current, so there's receivables, there's payables,
Yeah.
it's a snapshot in time. But the amount really stands out as the net.
What is really facing us is going for debt.
Is the area
Yes,
is
it's
one, okay, so it's the 250 and the 400.
Right, so we have 650 in outstanding debt that it isn't,
That's your long-term debt, not your operating.
thank you.
And so it's just maybe, it's a good way to bring this up as well, right? So we're just starting talking about capital stuff. So Meryl was explaining that over these past years, capital costs been incurred by transformers, by voltage regulators. And what RELC did do was go out and get a loan for those capital expenditures.
Yeah,
And so the loan is the de facto amount owed to the creditors.
right,
Tonight, they're here to tell you they need to actually get a capital loan so that those creditors can be paid back with the proceeds, and RELC will have long-term debt. And you're right, that's the amount of the long-term debt that will likely have to be.
that's not entirely it. So you said you had 32 transformers, is that correct?
About 32 left. This is, we have to purchase 20 extras.
Got 20 of them, so
Yeah, because we have some in inventory. We have,
you own enough to solve the problem forever with
We-
20K.
we have so many in inventory, I can't remember how many exactly, but we obviously need to purchase more to keep going. New installs, breakdowns. So that's where the 20 is. That's to replace.
I'm only trying to
Yeah.
understand kind of an equilibrium.
Yeah.
I've worked with you for
Yeah.
sure. Right?
Yeah,
And so I'm just trying to understand what that means in real terms for us to trade. with.
Yeah.
So if there's an equipment expenditure that is coming, all we need to spend is for 20 transformers, is that
yes,
good?
yeah. So like I said, we have nearly 30
Stock
stock.
to do-
So we just need to replace what we're going to use because we use everything in stock. We're not going to be able to continue.
Yeah.
So
Understood.
that's where it comes in.
So, because that's a fairly significant difference. Thank you, sorry.
Our other capital expenditures that we need to spend money on.
Yes.
And that was the segue, that's the next part, I guess, the marijuana piece.
Oh, yeah, okay, so, as I said, there's a 5-year capital project, which has, 3 major components to it, so I'll let Dylan explain what those items actually are.
So, yeah, this is a great introduction to this subject, so RELC has done some capital work. Is going to need to take on a capital debt. You are going to need to make payments on that capital debt. But the real thing that is kind of the punchline is the future, right? The future investments that we need. In the past 5 years, mostly transformer replacements for PCB, voltage regulators to buy a little time in terms of new growth. But ultimately, bigger investments are needed in the system. So what we have done is we've contacted Strum Engineering, they're a well-regarded firm, we're pretty close to the field, they're great in the field. They've looked at the infrastructure in the field, we've collected a bunch of data, we actually got a Federation of Canadian Municipalities branch to support the collection of the data on the system. Going out, check everything that's out there, getting the gauges of everything, figuring out what the state of it all was. But I think you're all understanding, you live here, that there's quite a bit of growth and new construction in certain areas of Riverport's territory. And a combination of the relative age of the infrastructure and the growth and the fact that most homes are electrifying, we see new heat pumps, we've got electric vehicles. There is going to be a capacity challenge. And so this project is mostly scoped by Strum Engineering to ensure that RELC would be able to supply energy. You wouldn't be actually unable to supply new builds or running up against brownouts for existing customers. These investments are needed. So Strum put together their, package and town took it out to try to find some external funding support. That's what we do. We try to make sure at least any money we spend is 50% matched by higher levels of government. So the Natural Resources Canada has a program to support that. So what Meryl's got up here on the screen is what we have pitched to Natural Resources Canada as effectively the minimum contribution they would need to make to Riverport's assets. We don't know the status of that application, but if it were to come through, they would pay about $2 million of what we are forecasted to be about $4 million of work over the next 5 years. That would leave the commission with $2 million to have to deal with through financing. Your current legislation only supports borrowing up to $1 million, so David will bring us back around to that challenge. But I just wanted to speak briefly about the 3 different projects up on the screen. So main run to 3-phase circuit, so my understanding is essentially where Kingsburg Road takes off is a 2-phase line, it's an old line. And that line will have to be upgraded all the way out to Kingsburg. And that is necessary to support new construction. The voltage regulators will give us a couple more years, but if we continue to see the kind of construction and electrification we're seeing, this investment has to be made. Similarly, the Indian Path, the Lane circuits, I think similar deal, like Phil.
They're just very old now. It's all smaller wire, like really, really.
The upgrades are needed, and ultimately those come out to 3 million out of your 4 million, and pretty self-explanatory why those are needed. The remaining 1 million is, I guess, what we could call the only part of this that's discretionary, and strongly recommended, and if you can get 50% dollars, that's where you want to get them. Is for resiliency. So essentially, Riverport system doesn't have any of what they might call smart characteristics. There's no automation. So when there is an outage, what the PLTs do, dedicated guys, they all come out, drive around, and they look for what might be wrong with the system, fire it up, it goes back down, drive out, take a look, isolate the area, do the same thing again, go back in, check the wires, figure out where the issue is, and eventually, after maybe 2 hours, if it's not average, they're down to the smallest area that they're able to isolate. Maybe it's a couple of residences, maybe it's one stretch of the highway, but they get down to that small area, and everybody else has power, they're able to do the work they need to do. That process of finding the outage and narrowing it down to the smallest area can happen as just a flicker of lights. It's just that the closers and switches in the system are not speaking to each other. So we could save a considerable amount of outages for the residents, but also we could save a considerable amount of call outs and time spent going around looking to find fault. By when we replace the reclosers, when we replace the switches, when these things, which are already quite appreciated, need replacement anyway, we're going to replace them with smart systems. We're going to link those systems together on a network, and we're going to be in a position to provide better and more resilient service with smaller and shorter outages. And that work would be able to be done in concert with the larger projects. There's some sort of economy around doing it all within one larger project, not the least of which is the 50% funding. So I hope that helps a little bit. I can answer further questions on it, but ultimately this is to set the context, talking about the future. There are things that just will have to be spent, and the current structure of the utility may not be suitable to those expenditures. Anything else you want me to say on that?
Thank you. So obviously, $2 million, we can get the extra funding, $2 million, it's still a lot of money. So, how does that translate as far as ratepayers and current? If you're trying to finance that out of current revenues for operations, it'll be in a 20% increase in power rates, basically. Obviously, our intention would be to try to find external financing to spread the cost and help us over time, spread the potential impact over time. That again, we're as Bill has said, we're limited as far as legislation, so there have to be some legislative changes for us to be able to go forward above 1 million, the maximum that we have now. But just as some rough examples, the amount of rating that would be required if we get external financing depend on the term of the loan, but if we had a 10-year loan term for those projects, it would probably mean 12-13% increase in power rates. So we can get 20-year financing would be 7 or 8%, something like that. So I guess just to sum up what I've been trying to demonstrate here is that over the past year, board members have spent a substantial amount of time trying to get a handle on the financial situation of the utility. So we're confident at this point that the finances have been stabilized. I think that the accounting is getting there. We still have ways to go yet, but we're in a position that we will soon have audited numbers that we can rely on to make decisions. However, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that in order to sustain the operation of this utility, and in order to invest in the grid, to maintain its integrity and ensure that power is going to be available, there will have to be great increases to cover some of the things that we've talked about here in this part of the presentation. So, anybody has any other questions? If not, I'll pass it on to whoever next.
In the past, what has been the chances of getting the external contribution from the government or other sources? What has that been traditionally? Is that possible? Is it?
I mean, I guess, you know, because RELC has traditionally had no capital debt, it's been decades since any major capital work was taken on. Obviously, these guys haven't had a lot of experience with that. Having the home bay, just in our experience, I think this is common with the other municipalities in the area. We really do depend on 50% external monies, and we get the home base capital program averages about 65% externally funded. We've got over $10 million of external funding going into works this summer, which is why we tried avoiding the home bay with you guys. So I do believe that, you know, we will have to secure the money. Hopefully through EnerCam, this is a very suitable process to this particular need. But if that is not successful, then obviously we will have to redouble those efforts and find that money elsewhere. I will say also that the area is blessed with an MLA who is quite conscious of that and has often helped the town obtain provincial funding. So, you know, maybe we get EnerCam funding and then you go and see if the province wants to also help. Or maybe the EnerCam funding doesn't come in as hoped for and the province could help. But ultimately, I would be optimistic that external funding, at least in 50%, could be.
Yes.
I don't think not that how much the impact that renewable energy photovoltaics have on the capacity you've got now?
Much to impact those.
How much impact does photovoltaics, renewable power, for each individual house have on sort of the sustainability, the reliability of the grid?
Well, again, the theory is
So from the reliability perspective, obviously the larger grid can operate with less than a sufficient supply of energy. So that energy can flow onto the grid unless there is enough energy to supplement what's coming off of the home solar arrays. So it won't allow for, you know, any kind of resilience benefit, except to those individuals who have it, especially with batteries. You're good to go. Unfortunately, from the commercial perspective, the cost to purchase the energy produced from your rooftop arrays actually exceeds the cost that the utility would have to pay to purchase that same energy from the market. So actually, everyone here is subsidizing those individuals with solar arrays by buying their energy for more than the energy would have cost had it just been coming from Nova Scotia Power.
I might misunderstood that. I thought we were on net meters for that. We only get credit for what we put back in, but I didn't believe that you were paying us for the power we put back in.
I guess the way I'm phrasing it speaks to my being on the utility side. We're taking for granted that if you were generating it, you would have been buying it from RELC. So that's how the math works that way. It's to say they're paying more because essentially they're not selling you the energy from Nova Scotia Power that they would have been selling you from Nova Scotia Power.
But they don't need it.
But they don't need it, but the system still costs.
Joking and sending, you don't, you're not buying.
The challenge is everything else that delivers the energy to the home is still there, and it still costs the same amount. It's about $1,400 per solar array per year that the rest of the customers sold. But you know, ultimately, I'm just answering the question. We're not. This is a method that is intended to encourage the construction of solar arrays, and I think in Riverport's territory it has done. And that was a provincial program that Riverport, like Nova Scotia Power, has supported. It's encouraged people to do. But you know, ultimately, the vision of it that the province had was to get more green energy generated, and not necessarily the lowest cost of energy. So.
And do I understand, I know correctly, that there's no distribution charge, it's pure consumption?
I have to go back and take a look at the drawings.
That's where you can go.
So that is the challenge. The challenge is that we're not recovering those distribution costs when you're not buying energy. Yeah.
Is it, am I correct in that the solar customer are being charged the same service charge as I am without solar.
You get charged more.
Are
Their
they-
base charge
Times
is,
it nothing.
Pardon?
$15 instead of $13.75.
Yeah, I guess the issue is that
Right.
the point was made, the rate structure doesn't actually take all of the costs that go into delivering energy and establish that as the base rate, like that base rate that you're paying, it may be equivalent to the other customers, but that base rate, it doesn't contain all of the costs associated with delivering energy other than the purchase of energy.
No, I know,
Yeah.
because I'm only using the system one way. I draw down on the system. Solar customers have to be able to have the capacity to put it back to the grid and then pull it, the other customers pull it out. So they're using the grid, both ways, we're not, and we're subsidizing. But the other, thing is, if you continue and let everybody go on solar, it's a death knell for the small, unit,
Yeah, well, it's a death knell for utilities in general, everybody.
no, but if you let the solar, everybody go solar, you will have,
No, it's not sustainable, you cannot have everybody grid.
but everybody in the system could,
In theory,
in
yes.
theory, yes. I'm not saying they would.
And in creating the incentive structure, the province assumed that only a small percentage of the population would actually adopt rooftop solar. But you're right, I mean, it's not a sustainable model if applied to the entire population.
Right,
I'm going to exercise my right as chair to carry on. These are important questions that are being asked, but they are not the questions that we want you to think about. So if I may, I'm going to exercise my role as chair and move on with the background on this and the problems that Ralph is currently undergoing and why. Okay?
Like it, anyone that you're going to your talking.
And actually a number of the things that I was going to say, and I probably should have said them up front at the beginning rather than now. Because various bits have been touched on without a real background to provide understanding. The history of REL. REL dates back to 1920. At that time, there were multiple small utilities across Nova Scotia, at least 700. And over time, those gradually got amalgamated, joined with others, and Nova Scotia Power came into existence to swallow up a number of these. And we are left now, at this point in time, with 4, in theory, 5 independent electricity utilities. Donington Bay, Berwick, Antigonish, Riverport Electric, which was the last non-municipal one, and Lunenburg, which is in a peculiar situation that's not worth going into. So RELC is in a particularly unusual situation. RELC's original legislation set it up as an essentially autonomous body, which was backed by the municipality, but they themselves had taxation authority, and they themselves had the right to seek monies from their members to cover the cost of capital expenditures. The connection with the municipality got lost at some point in the distant past. The ability to tax their constituents to cover their expenses got lost, and that control of their income was turned over essentially to the UARB. So we lost control of our ability to set our rates to cover our expenses. And there was in the original setup, there was something called a sinking fund, which was to be maintained. And that was going to cover the cost of any future upgrades, maintenance, capital expenses. We lost that. So we have no means of getting capital. We have no means of controlling our income. And we have control also. There's an additional element in here that because we are getting the power over a grid which is controlled by Nova Scotia Power, who are given permission by the UARB to charge us for the cost of delivering the power. And again, we don't have control on that. So we are at the mercy of multiple agencies that control us, and we have little control ourselves. So there's the fundamental problem that we are facing at the moment. So the three municipal units got together. So Town of Home Bay, Berwick, and Ganesh got together and formed this organization area. Area built themselves a wind farm at Ellison's. And because we were still independent, we got sort of grandfathered into this arrangement. We didn't actually contribute anything to the operation, so we really have no control and they have no responsibility to look after us. So when they agreed to take us on and continue to take us on, that's very much at their out of their goodwill, and solely because they like the idea of having an independent or outfit, and they like the idea of being able to deliver green power, because that's the essence of it. That we, the group that formed this, are getting 40% at the moment. 40% of our electric power is coming from the Ellis House wind farm. The other 60% is coming from Nova Scotia Power. The intent is in the next how many years? 2, 3, or 4 years? In a very short term, we are moving towards the ability to provide 100% of our power from green power. Nova Scotia Power is not interested in producing green power. Nova Scotia Power is not really interested in producing or giving people like us good service. They're interested in paying their shareholders, and they are guaranteed. They're guaranteed an annual 8% or thereabouts profit. We aren't making a profit. We don't want a profit, but we do want to break even. So that's our issue. Now, the other thing that has been addressed here, that has been brought up, is the ability of the 3 municipal units to tap into funds that are paid to municipal units. We are not a municipal unit. We lost that as well. It was in the original act, but we don't have that connection anymore. So we are independent, and we're really independent. And because we're independent, we do not have access to many of these other matching sources. The additional things that we can tap into, like with $2 million in this or that. All right. I made mention of the issue of capital expenditures. Because we no longer had a sinking fund and a way of capitalizing our expenditures, the boards for the past several years at least have been paying for capital expenses out of operating expenses. And that hasn't worked because when you combine capital expenses and operating expenses, that is much more than we are able to bring in terms of coverage by the membership. So we have to have a better way of dealing with capital expenses. And that's one of the things that we need to discuss tonight. That was why we called the meeting, in fact. So the first issue then is the lack of capital fund. The next issue is the lack of control of our income. Reference is being made to what to do about our control by the UARB. The UARB really sort of was empowered by John Buchanan's government, who sold off Nova Scotia Power to America. Yeah. And incidentally, I was severely criticized for saying that America was a multinational. It is in fact owned in Nova Scotia. Its headquarters are up in Halifax, and I didn't know this, but it is also a multinational. And it functions as a multinational, and it functions because they are generating income to pay to their shareholders using our money. And I object to that too, personally. So, and then the other thing is that Nova Scotia Power has scant reason to green the grid unless they are absolutely forced into it. And as you may have picked up on, they're just being charged a fine of $8 billion because $10 billion, $10 billion because they didn't bring the power supply up to a predetermined amount of green power.
Stop talking about Nova Scotia Power. Why don't you talk about what we're doing here?
Okay. Well,
You know, we know your feelings.
I want to mention Nova Scotia Power. You want to be explicit about it because one of the things that we could do is to sell out Nova Scotia Power. We could simply say, we can't do this on our own. We give up. So we sell the road, no stand up. That is also dependent on the idea that Nova Scotia Power would have us. When Canso closed their utilities, they told them they tried to sell it to Nova Scotia Power. Nova Scotia Power eventually said, okay, we'll buy it for $1. So they lost the whole thing. Yeah. So, but that is one thing that we could do, and I think we have to sort of be realistic about it. I don't want to do it. That's not my my desire or intent at all. What I want to talk about is things we can do to help ourselves to avoid that. I think that's the last thing.
That's really not up to you, that's up to this group of ratepayers.
Exactly, which is why it's called meeting. Okay. So, what can we do? We can attempt to get to free ourselves from control by the UARB, what we now call themselves.
Nova Scotia Energy Board.
Nova Scotia Energy. So, and we have actually approached the government asking them to get us out of control by the Nova Scotia Energy Board. And that's ongoing. As citizens, I think it would be helpful if you all approached your MLA and said, why don't we liberate REL from this control?
Could you explain what the benefit would be to be liberated, as you say, from the utility review board? And as a ratepayer, I would be comforted by having a good relationship with Nova Scotia Power and not be dependent for 100% on a wind farm in other services. Like I find that a risky proposition as opposed to having multiple sources, because usually, if somebody was.
Yeah.
I don't understand that, the tension with Nova Scotia Power.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to speak, so I think first off, there's two things, right, the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board or the Nova Scotia Energy Board is a government regulator entity. And Nova Scotia Power is just a monopoly producer, provider of power and grid operator. So, David's, feelings on one or the other notwithstanding, the Nova Scotia Energy Board's role in this regard and why we want to be exempted from them has to do with the regulatory burden predominantly. A good example of that would be you were subject to a small deferred revenue charge you would have seen on your bills from Ashley earlier this year. Speaking to the lag between the requested rates from RLC's general rate application and the actual phase-in of rates. At the time of that general rate application, RLC said, we think we're gonna come up short for money. If we do, can we come back to the deferred revenue? To which the board in writing said, absolutely, come to us in that eventuality. Riverport did earlier this year decide the commission that they needed that money to be recouped. And they went to the board and it cost $12,000 to jump through the hoops that the board put in their way. $12,000 to recover $180,000. So more than 10% of the benefit of that increase, all the money you won't pay, goes back to the lawyers and consultants that the board demands to answer their follow-up questions. So on one hand, it's the regulatory burden, it's the cost, it's the time to jump through hoops. That's quite difficult. The other thing is, in all of the Atlantic provinces except this one, there is a legislative exemption for the municipal entities, for those entities, those small local providers, to go to you to justify the rate increase. Instead of a process that takes them to Halifax, come to the AGM with your rate increase. And if everyone here is willing to agree to something like that, do we need to pay $170,000 to lawyers? So I think on that level, it really is just about the process, the appropriateness of the province validating the local accountability. The UARB, or particularly the Nova Scotia Energy Board, was created, as David said, to regulate Nova Scotia Power. They weren't created to regulate the Riverport Electric Commission. So that's the point about the regulatory group, is a separate point from Nova Scotia Power, big monolithic entity. And I think if you're following the news, the province has been getting quite involved with Nova Scotia Power and their role as both the generator of power, the operator of the grid systems, and a de facto regulator in their own right. And I'll give you an example of that. As David mentioned, Nova Scotia Power makes the money every way they can. They make it as a generator who sells power to RLC. They also make it by charging, we always have a wind farm operation to transmit power to RLC. And they finally also make it by saying that any energy that is generated from any other source, they have to maintain the backup capacity in case there's some failure of those assets or those distribution assets. Now, I'm not saying any of that is unreasonable on their part, but those three opportunities, to David's point, give them the control to then use those different interconnections to their advantage.
That's the same reason we want the same thing for. If we put all our eggs in one basket, and it goes down, where do you go?
Yeah, I don't disagree. These are lots of system planning
You gotta
questions.
think about this in different ways. There's nothing wrong with approaching the government and asking to streamline the RFP process. If they got a flow through that comes from Nova Scotia Power, then it should be automatically flowed through the law, and you don't have to go get an increase. The only time you need an increase or a rate application is if you're requesting more from your customers without proof that you really need it.
It doesn't really have anything to do with proof. It's if you're requesting an increase that has to do with anything other than a change in the Nova Scotia Power's municipal tariff rate that is applied to RLC purchase of energy. So a change could include vegetation maintenance, a change could include increases in costs of wages over the years.
But that requires them to ask you why you need it. All right, that's what they're there for. And that's proof, i.e., yes, what you're asking for is reasonable and we grant that.
Yeah,
That should be above and beyond any rate flow that they've already decided to pass on to whoever your supplier is.
I think ultimately, we are actually all in agreement on your point, that red tape is a negative, and that ultimately it's Star LC's benefit to be able to have an open system in which to operate, to find the best value for the ratepayer. So I don't necessarily
My
want to
point
get.
is, I'd be a little concerned if your point is, we should actually be excluded from all that security.
Yeah,
And you would take that on and you would present it here, but the problem with presenting it here is if you show the folks that you need that rate increase, right? And what are people gonna say? No. Because if they say no, then what happens to the system?
And what you're saying is
So
actually
it's
what
not a matter of
you're saying to me.
It's a matter of, we're gonna get the approval regardless.
When I gave the example to the board of the $12,000 that was paid to get $108,000 on rates from you folks.
Yeah.
They told me, just what you said, that you should all benefit, you should all appreciate the opportunity for them to validate those rates.
That's not for.
So if you support that, if you agree with that, then you don't have any issues, but I just wanted to point out, at the end of the day, the effort on the part of municipals, the effort on the part of these folks is just to reduce the red tape burden associated with the board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a process.
And the role of Nova Scotia Power as the same entity that actually is able to say, oh, actually, sorry, we reserved all transmission on the interguided in Brunswick. So there's no available transmission for NV Power to take it in. So I guess we're now gonna have to charge you for the backup on that energy. That's something that they've been able to do by manipulating their role as a grid operator, as a generator. Province has already broken that up, right? The decisions have been made by the province to put an end to that. And I think David, if I can speak a little bit for David, is attempting to say that it is actually in our interest to we're plugged into those regulatory processes to see Nova Scotia Power's overwhelming monopoly and control lessen through the intervention of the province. So, not saying Nova Scotia Power doesn't do anything good for Riverport, but what we're saying is Nova Scotia Power shouldn't control all of the levers of power. And if there are opportunities that, this entity and all the other little ones that represent less than 2% of the overall market can work with the provincial government to support us, to reduce some of those opportunities for us to be leveraged, we will take. And I'll let David get back on track, because ultimately I'm not, he had a point he was trying to make, but I just wanted to address some of the questions if this has been helpful. David?
I think you did a hell of a lot better job than I did. All right, so as I see it, the issues are control of our enterprise. At the moment, we are controlled by multiple different entities, and we have virtually no control ourselves on either our income or expenses. We don't have a mechanism to capitalize things, and that's one of the things that we are supposed to be addressing this evening. We don't have a mechanism for capital creation, capital expenditures. We have been financing our capital expenditures out of operating funds, and that's not a way to run a business. We are a business, we're a small business. So we need some means of doing that. One area in which we can look to this is some kind of relationship with, for example, the town of Mahone Bay, possibly Lunenburg, and us as a quasi-governmental sort of backed entity, which then gives us access to considerable funding through the municipal, municipal loan board, municipal something, so
Municipal finance board.
municipal finance board. So there's money out there. Alternatively, we can try to generate or get the money locally with a loan from somebody else, and the Rel Act permits us to get our monies from anywhere. We can borrow from municipal entities, we can also borrow from private entities, we can borrow from banks. If we were to recreate ourselves as a cooperative, we have access to monies from the cooperative council. And I was thinking we could also go to the local credit union and say, this is, now you sign, this is not a proposal, I'm simply saying, this is another source of doing things. We could also go to the local credit union, who would then finance, or possibly finance us, because we are part of the cooperative movement, and they are. Well, we could approach, we've lost our connection to government at some point in the remote past, and nobody knows when. But we could go back to the municipality, the Riverport municipality, and say, will you take us under your wing? Because again, that gives us access back to the municipal loan board. And what I'm doing now is just throwing on things that we might be able to do to salvage our situation, because we can't continue to function the way we currently are structured. We have to do something. Another idea, and as I said, this is only blue sky on my part, and I want to get your ideas as well. So where this is all going is, how are we going to extract ourselves from this? And the board is not going to make that decision. Or the decision is going to be made by the membership, because the members own this enterprise. So the members have to take responsibility as well. Another way that works, or that might work, and this is somewhat unusual. There's a fascinating structure that was created by the Nova Scotia government, who sort of led the country in it, called a CDIF, Community Economic Development Investment Fund, which basically you buy into the enterprise. The enterprise seeks money to run their enterprise, and the people who put money into a CDIF get a guaranteed return from the government. The government gives you back in your first year. Let's say you put in $10,000 as an investment. The government gives you back $3,500 upfront in the form of a rebate on your provincial taxes. So you get $3,500 back tax-free, because this is not a taxable thing. This is not a rebate on your provincial tax. In 5 years' time, you put in, you get another $2,000 back of your $10,000. And you hold on to it for 10 years, you get back another $1,000. So in the end, you have recouped 35 and 20, 65% of all of those programs as an investment with a tax-free return funded by the provincial government. It seems to me like a sweet deal, and there are a few enterprises in Nova Scotia that are actually exploiting this and have been for 10 years.
David, I know the agenda up on the screen here doesn't actually show the item in people's packets about structural change.
Oh, yes.
But I do have, if it's appropriate, if you want me to speak to, just so you know, David asked me to speak to some of the structural change options he's highlighted, so whenever you're ready, come back to it.
Has anybody thought that any of those are?
It really costly amount.
You know, the
It's
answer
not-
today was
it's not
on this,
really-
understand. Do you know what the rate structure is going to be at the end of 5 years? With there, whatever option you put on the table?
Can I speak to it? Yeah.
So, I'm gonna get to the question, but if I could just take 1 second and walk it back just a little bit about what the option does, David was discussing, so. Essentially what we've laid out here is, there's been prior year capital, it's been covered by not paying creditors, organizations, the Riverport owes for supplying energy, etc. Now there's need to go out and borrow some money for that prior year capital, and we've kind of covered the idea that in the coming years, there will be more capital. So, ultimately right now, Riverport has the authority, the commission has the authority to go out with your blessing, borrow up to $1 million. Ultimately, with the current structure, it's unlikely that there's actually a financial institution willing to loan Riverport $1 billion at this point. So, essentially those tax powers in the legislation, they were there because that would be necessary to convince a lender that RELC was good for it. The way municipalities borrow, just to provide a little context, is every borrowing undertaken by a municipality for capital projects, which is basically all the capital projects municipalities engage in these days, to pretty much finance the borrowing. The province actually has to approve. Municipalities lay out the capital program, they go to the province provides a resolution that says, you can now take this to the bank, and if you default, the province is gonna pay. And that's as good as gold to any financial institution. So that's essentially how municipalities borrow. And to make that even a little bit sweeter, we pool all of that borrowing through the municipal finance board. And all of the municipal capital projects in an entire year are put out to market at one time, saying, if you're a financial institution, want to get in on this at a good rate. And that generally allows for quite a good rate relative to the scale of something like RELC, and the province's backstop about that spending. So the structural challenge is, how does Riverport, how does this commission avail itself of the provincial backstop? How does the commission get the ability to go to a bank and actually say, can we have some money, and the bank will give money? Ultimately, the structure that currently exists isn't gonna support that. And so, David referenced a bunch of different things that could be looked at, but at a very basic level, if new legislation were brought in to replace the Riverport Electric Light Act, what that legislation would need to do is ensure that the new commission, whatever its service territory, had the ability to borrow, was appropriately backstopped and able to spend money on capital, so that over the long term, rates could be smoothed out in an appropriate way, capital spending can be projected into the future, and things can be run in a normal and responsible way. The legislation just doesn't support that. So, right now, the town of Mahone Bay has electric utility, the town of Riverport has electric utility. Riverport Electric Utility is located within the district of Lunenburg. There are municipal entities, those two towns, that district, that all have the potential and an interest in working with the commission, would potentially see themselves taking on some role in that. As David said, traditionally, all of the other small utilities have a municipality, at least one, associated with them, giving them access to the municipal finance corp and supporting that kind of financing model. Whatever new structure is explored, there would have to be an effort by the commissioners to work with those adjacent municipal units, adjacent electrical utilities, and look at a new commission model, new legislation that would be suitable to going forward into the modern era. Certainly there are, lots of different ways that could be constructed, have representatives from different service territories, At the end of the day, it's down to who is interested to participate in constructing a concept of a new utility commission. I will say, on the record, these folks did reach out to the town of Mahone Bay to ask if there would be an interest in initiating that conversation. But they also feel a responsibility to you folks to have your blessing to go further with those conversations and to involve the province, and to talk to the town of Lunenburg, and to get our municipal representatives here from the district of Lunenburg involved. So, the exploration of structural options resolution that David Coulter introduced as one of the 3 resolutions being put forward for your consideration, not tonight, but at a future special meeting. That resolution is about being able to explore those options. And I'm sure being able to explore cooperative models and CDIS and all the other things that are out there. But at the end of the day, at a minimum, a new commission will need to have the powers that were originally, to David's point, intended to be associated with this entity, but it won't likely have them on its own. And, those times have changed. So I think just to kind of put in context the idea of structural change. At a minimum, it's about working with adjacent units, working with adjacent electrical utilities, and seeing if we could all be stronger together. The other units have motives of their own. Ultimately, they also need to get with the times in terms of longer term sustainability. Mahone Bay and Riverport are two of the smallest electrical utilities in North America. It's necessary for cooperation. It's necessary to find scale. When we went out and bought those transformers, Bill was talking about it, we put that into the market together, see if we can get a better deal. Now, both of us are part of the Maritime Electrical Utilities Alliance, an entity comprised of all the municipal electric utilities in Nova Scotia and the Prince Edward Island, putting our purchasing power together. St. John Energy lead a tender for meters procurement, and they tack that rate on and say, if Riverport wants to get some meters, you can get the meters on the same pricing that St. John Energy is getting. So small utilities are working together already, and for Riverport, you have your blessing to go out and talk about options for long-term sustainability, and then bring something back that is material that you can chew on, that has real information. That is, I think, where we want to leave the conversation with respect to structural change. It's the beginning, but it's the beginning that the commissioners who want your blessing to engage in. Because otherwise, as David said, there are not a lot of options. Nova Scotia Power may wish to take on the territory, but what that looks like is to be determined. I think the question for me is a good question.
Mike, you give a time frame that you're saying we want to have reestablished ourselves alive with, maybe I'm using much wrong way to phrase it. When this will be realistic?
An excellent question, and the answer is, I don't think we've actually got to that degree.
No, I just don't think that you would take a fair guess at it. Like within a year, 6 months.
I think within this year, David, you need to come back with something.
We have to, I think.
That's what I'm.
Yeah,
no, I'm not trying to make that.
We are sort of, we're going down at the moment.
Yeah.
There's no benefit in extending
Understood.
the sooner the better. But I would also like to emphasize that we are looking for advice from you as well. So this is not you're empowering us to do something. This is also help us. Tell us what you think might work.
How can you do that without the facts?
Yeah.
You have a baseline set that you can compare these proposals to. Maybe you come back with some number, how do we know the number is fine? Does it work with this?
I mean, the numbers in terms of future external spending numbers?
Well, I'm talking about where you're going to be at the end of all this process. There has to be some tangible benefit to each of the proposals, whether you sell off the Nova Scotia Power, whether you put out a separate entity structure. There has to be at the end of the day for the ratepayers to look at and say, it's going to cost us this much, and we can compare it based on this, and we can make a decision at that particular point and say, hey, that's wonderful, let's do that.
No,
My understanding is that is exactly where they expect to get, but this is the beginning of that process.
I understand that.
but
I'm
this
asking
is
you,
not. This
is
is
there a
not.
baseline in which you were going to compare this to?
At this point, it is not a cost benefit thing. It is how can we restructure? What structure can we put in place? It's not, does this structure cost more than that structure? It is this structure feasible? Can we make this work? The costs, if you want, come down to, can we get monies from this pot, which we currently can't get monies from? For example, as we're not a municipal unit, so we can't get funding from the Municipal Finance Corporation. But it's not a matter this is gonna be more expensive or this is gonna be less, it's what can we do?
It's not a matter of just dollars, it's tangible benefit to the system down the road.
And one of the tangible benefits of remaining
Well,
independent in
that's,
some way
that's
is,
an option for you to look at, I'm asking you how you compare it to other options.
okay, one of the benefits is that we get much better service as we are, rather than selling up. We get much more green power than we are.
That's not the question.
Okay, I always haven't understood it. Yeah.
So this may or may not be your answer, but I think, just be honest with everybody, I think baseline is Nova Scotia Power.
I don't care.
Whether Nova Scotia Power offers, we might be able to provide something better. Better in terms of service, better in terms of green energy, and hopefully better in terms of pricing, although that's the difficult side. But what about baseline, to me, baseline is what Nova Scotia Power is called.
Fine, that's what you're comparing it to. I'm asking, have you a baseline that allows you to make an effective comparison?
And we are at that stage yet, we're right now, we're trying to collect ideas, we have some of our own. We're coming to group here this evening and motivate players to try and collect thoughts. There's gonna be portal.
Yeah, we'll be talking about how the conversation. There are a few other hands up, maybe we could ask.
Yeah.
Right now, we are a legislative body, I mean, it's a 1920 act, but it's still recognized by the government, some of what you're describing. Clearly has an impact on that, has that been considered? I mean, we're bound by this,
So I guess because I am here sort of empowered to speak the legislative compliance piece, so my understanding right now is. We're here to say that ultimately we're in compliance with legislation. And we're going to hit the wall where the legislation and staying in compliance with it is actually going to be incompatible with the future needs of the utility. So right now, they're making every effort to stick to this legislation. That's why they brought the 3 resolutions that are coming forward to the upcoming special meeting. David will talk about it as a way to kind of end tonight.
my question is, the impact, if we say we decided to merge or whatever with Mahone Bay or what happens to the legislation and our profits?
So a private member's bill would have to be introduced to amend or replace the Riverport Electric Act. And until that happened, compliance with that act is non-negotiable, right? We gotta comply with the act. So what is being considered is a request to our MLA that would eventually, if the group here, came back again later in the year and endorsed it, would be a new piece of legislation being introduced having to do with the commission.
If we were to adhere to the Revenue Act of 1920. When it was set up, there was one man who was running it, and this is all men. There was one man who was running it, and there were 2 people whose job it was to go around and assess the value of all the properties in the area. And they had the right, if you didn't pay the bill, they set the bill. So they set their own rates, and if you didn't pay your bill, they would seize your property, and that was the end of that.
David, my point is, that is still on the books, and that is still recognized, and regardless of all that, something would have to be done with it.
Yeah.
Even if
Well,
they say
the act
that's
was
something.
redone with a legislative subcommittee that was made up of 3 ratepayers and 2 board members. For the purpose of raising it from $15,000 to $1 million. We didn't touch any of that stuff. I was on that board. I wanted to fix some of the stuff that was blatantly no longer valid in it, and because of time constraints for needing that money, that didn't happen. To do what you're talking about, you'd have to do the same thing over again. Because at the end of the day, the act is going to govern how you hold your meetings, how you control the votes, how many people have to be at the meeting and all that kind of stuff. And I think it has to be 100 people and you have to have 60%, 56% in the act, but that's where it would ultimately wind up at. You've got to submit the act to the legislature to do away with that act and make another act.
Absolutely.
But that's difficult for ratepayers to have any real input into it, because most of the ratepayers have no idea what's in the act.
Well, I think these guys are trying to bring everyone into the conversation, and on that note, we really do wanna try to wrap up, right, before it gets too late for everyone, so. Maybe we can let the hands, I think there was at least one at the back, if they wanna ask any questions that haven't been covered. And then maybe David, would you like to talk about next steps of the following meeting and whether there is anyone who wants to join the commission?
Yeah.
After this great sales pitch about the because you.
Okay, so the as Bill says, because what we're trying to do is to get the input from the members, because it is your utility. We have set up what do you call it? A forum,
Yeah, I guess you could call it a new web portal, a engagement portal.
it's a specialized web portal that allows interaction, conversation over the next month by the membership. So everything is open, everything is posted on it is open to everybody, and everybody has the right to post whatever they want. So what we're looking for is to get ideas and possibly to get consensus as to where we go next. And in answer to your question is how fast are we doing this? Doing this in 1 month, so that we work.
Right, yeah, so we're coming back in a month's time to vote on 3 resolutions. Do you want to keep the resolution?
But these resolutions, are they not part of the act, and that you would have to resubmit the act to make these?
These 3 resolutions are designed to be in compliance with the act.
Yes.
So one of them is to explore structural changes that would require changes to the act. But the actual motion is just to ask for your blessing to engage in the exploration of that and bring back to you actually a proposal for change.
So the resolutions, I think you actually have copies of the resolutions in the package. The first resolution is very simple. Oh,
Sorry, I'm sorry, I think I may be fairly typical of some of the people in the room. I'm not a ratepayer, well, I pay a fairly substantial electric bill most months.
Yeah.
The 2 people who are right and left are also in the same boat.
Are you not here over 180 days?
No, it depends on the year, there's various circumstances, but I don't go.
You're not raising
A bill along with a lot of other people.
Right.
Is there any way that we can be represented here? Maybe you can speak to that, if you don't mind.
No.
Because that's a lot of people, like Kingsburg would be really some.
Yeah, one of the things that is constrained by the 1920 Act is eligibility to participate in the election of commissioners and the resolutions that are being put forward. So in the package, Claire, who is a returning officer, so great here to run elections, so she can certainly help with this stuff, is providing you with the guidance from legislation as to who can participate in those votes. And one of the considerations in terms of future legislative change might be who has the franchise to participate in that type of a vote in association with the commission. Currently, though, the legislation really is very strict about who has the right to participate. And the methodology we're using is that given that you now all have a handout about it, when it comes down to those votes on the 23rd, it is up to you to, by participating, validate that you had the right to participate in that process. So if there are any other questions about that, obviously we're happy to talk about it separately.
I don't want to ask for that too long, sorry. I'll ask him.
Can the act be posted on your website? So that
It
people,
is.
it?
Yeah.
Is it current? You did the last one of the or whatnot.
And I would like to know what mechanism makes for those of us who don't have a computer, because there are a number of us. And I'm feeling left out again.
And so what I would suggest is our staff practice would enable us to start, if David and commissioners receive information, put that in conversations, we'll take that information and put something up, so, you know, you can participate in what everybody else is hearing by virtue of interacting with your commissioners up here. They would be your bridge to that conversation.
That's, well, you make a suggestion.
Yeah, do you have another suggestion as to what you'd like to see? I imagine they'd like to hear it. And it doesn't have to be tonight.
Part of me go to the office and pick up information on drop-off information, so, I mean, I don't know. But there's got to be a mechanism, a simple mechanism, somebody can sit at home and use a computer, that's great. But I can't do that, and yet I feel that there's certainly things that I would love to say, and how is it best done? And I
David, I guess
contacted
that's-
one of the commissioners every time, I never thought, not gonna be appropriate, they're not gonna be happy and I'm all right.
The best I can say is, I hear you. I see this as a very genuine problem. I think you are entitled to some form of resolution, but I don't, at this point, know what the best way of doing it is. And I think the only thing that I can offer is that I undertake to contact the people involved myself. It's a bit of a trouble.
Do you know how many there are?
No, I don't think it's a great number.
And actually, it's, I think, a lot more than you think. Really.
This gentleman right has suggested.
I don't want to keep going up to the.
I might be the only person in the room with his twice down sleeping, if you on that. I think a lot of these questions are pretty great, but I also think the question that we're gonna be discussing in 1 month is simply to explore options. So I think I would suggest, Mark and I just had a little chit chat, we'd like to have a community meeting where we don't feel like it's the community versus the commission, as we sit down and talk to each other, and we actually talk about this is our community, this is our utility. Maybe some people don't want to work at school, we're gonna come in, but I just don't think, and then we talk about what are the specific criteria that we're going to use to evaluate this, is it expenses, is it renewable resources, is it whatever we want. Those are all conversations, but I just wanted to point out that the only thing that we're considering in this is, should we explore the options? So I just suggest we don't continue to hash it out while I'm waiting on that. I just want to say that we don't important conversation. Okay, this is some helpful forums to continue to attack. I don't know.
Answer to show us the question. While the portal's going on, you can certainly create a gathering, you're gonna have a conversation. Feedback.
Sure.
Okay, that was
There is those things going on, how do you use it?
Thank you.
I do have another issue with, if you've got the ways and means to be able to do. Are somebody keeping notes on this meeting tonight? Will there be notes produced that will be posted on wherever this website is? And then on a monthly basis, that we go back to the motion that was put forth in 21 and 2022, approved by the floor, that these meetings all have detailed notes that has to be delivered somehow to the ratepayers on a monthly basis. And there is a motion that I don't have but finally fell out because the motion was taken in 2021. That board took that motion, thought that they needed to adopt the motion at their monthly meeting and amend the motion. You can't do that with a motion that's gone to an AGM that's been tabled, seconded, and approved by the floor cannot be amended. Cannot have anything done with it other than act on it, and we took legal advice from McGinnis, Cooper and Robinson. When I went to fix the problem of the previous board, doing what they did. So I think for full transparency, we need those notes so that anybody who's interested, and I know there's a lot of people that are apathetic, but there are a lot of people out there that would read notes of the meetings, the monthly meetings, and it has to have details in it of motions presented, what was discussed, and who was voted on, who voted out, and whatnot. This is in the.
What notes are you looking for?
Pardon?
What notes are you looking for?
That's the notes I'm referring to are the month over month notes and the AGM. Those.
Or when?
The
For
meetings
now,
the
or
meetings
for
are the
future?
No, I'm going forward now. I haven't got the notes
Yeah,
that.
maybe I can just come in and say, the meetings of the commissioners, those minutes will be available on the website.
Right,
This session has actually been recorded, and the recording of this session will also be available.
good.
So,
Yes.
I know people are already starting to trickle out, but the unfortunate part that we haven't done yet tonight is to ask you if anyone here tonight is actually willing to consider joining these folks in this challenging mission. So, David, just because we're seeing people leave, I think we gotta cut to the chase on that,
I
right?
do.
So after all this,
We could use some legal advice. That said, the 1923 legislation is pretty silly, to be honest. The control on voting is ridiculous. You people don't have a vote, you're paying your bills.
They did not want to
So
fix
there's
that.
no way to get a representative feeling of what people are thinking about how to keep this enterprise going. Our core problem is our expenses are higher than our income.
Mhm.
There isn't much of a difference. But the means by which we change that is really difficult. As John talked about, going through the various agencies, it's really difficult, very expensive in consultants, in time, in a whole lot of things. We're trying to get through a few motions here tonight at 9 o'clock already, and I think we should.
David, if you just go to this, you wanna call people for. We have written up here on the wall, a place where the names of people who are willing to serve as a commissioner.
The problem could have been solved by a nominating committee that lists who is free offering and who has been approached to. be-
So in that way, David already mentioned, there's one name that they're putting forward as a nomination, right? That would be the name of Arlie Robarger. Arlie's not here, but you're not required to be here tonight to be willing to stand.
But it's also not reasonable to expect Harvey to.
No.
On this commission, because
It's fair ball.
not experience now.
Yeah,
So give two other names, yeah.
But you can avoid holding the vote
I know.
by having a nominating report, and if there's only two vacancies, it's two.
I see where you're coming from, yeah, we are here now.
Well, no, you don't have the structure that you need there to do that, because at the end should have been a nominating report that we could approve.
Okay, well, maybe though, if anybody else is interested, we could actually just do the actual request. Is anyone here, or do you know of anyone who has indicated that they would be willing to stand to join these guys on the commission? Is there anyone in the room who, after hearing all this, would actually like to be a part of these guys?
Yes.
Because they really could use a few more people, with only 3 people, meeting their quorum is down to every single member of them showing up to every meeting. And we can ask again in July, but we'd obviously love to have somebody put their name in, but I don't know, maybe you wanna call 3 times or something?
Okay. Anybody willing to offer to serve as commissioner. Anybody willing to offer to serve as a commissioner?
And of course, you have to read the 1920 to know if you're eligible.
So
That is actually in your hand, so you don't have to go all the way to legislation to confirm your own. So if there aren't no nominations tonight, these folks have to continue on as 3 commissioners, those vacancies remain. But if you do go away from this and you look over the materials and you think, hey, I would actually be willing to join these folks, I'm sure David would love to hear from you anytime.
We haven't,
you haven't done
we haven't
early.
properly talked about himself. Harley Robar has said he is willing to continue as a commissioner, but he can't do so without your approval, so.
Does
In
that,
essence,
does that support, does anybody?
You gotta wait for
that
the AGM to do that.
Well, this is the
This is
AGM.
the AGM.
Waiting to have a vote or a special.
Well, we're not waiting to vote for Harley, we're just confirming no one's standing with him.
Right.
And if no one is standing with him, David could call to confirm Harley as a commission member.
Then do you approve of Harley being appointed as a commissioner? And then we'll talk about the 5th position. Does anybody disagree? Okay, everybody agrees. So now we're left with one position to be filled. I ask, please, somebody join us, help us. But you can't.
I understand that, so, but I do have a question. So you have all the email addresses for the ratepayers, is it not possible to send one special notice that says, we are desperately seeking qualified legal help, whatever you want, to the membership, so that they can come forward. There are lots of lawyers, I don't know what we need to speak with, but it might be possible to arouse them.
So in that sense, the invite for this meeting did quite clearly make that call. But if we're left with vacancies, these guys will have to go away and think about how to continue to engage to fill those vacancies.
Well, I'm making, proposal, I realize I can't, but it is a reasonable proposal, if it's use the communication methods available to you to seek the assistance you require.
And the
It's
second,
not an unreasonable.
and the second option, again, I'm not familiar enough with the act, but I'm assuming the commissioners provide the governance and vote on things as a commission amongst themselves. Surely you could set up subcommittees that have people like us who are eligible to be commissioners, but have skills in things like governance and not-for-profits like we, who could help. So there's, I believe you can be creative and still do things where you can engage members of the community that are here and interested in help.
Yeah, there's nothing in the act that says you can't have a committee that comprises more than the commissioners. That you can have a committee that includes other people.
Right. And hopefully this process does serve to create more opportunities, from Mark offering to host a meeting here to your offering to join the subcommittee, if I understood that correctly. I think these guys will absolutely be willing to look at those type of opportunities.
But from the community, I would like to thank all 3 commissioners here. And I'd especially like to thank Merrill for getting, I know how difficult it was for you to get those numbers and present the numbers in the way you presented them. The home bay must have helped you greatly with that, but I think that he deserves, or that they deserve.
At this point, I would like to call for a dissolution.
Sure. Let's get the hostage long enough. Thanks, everybody. We will stick around here 3 minutes, because if you like, that's not.